and welcome back to the 45th Annual Norman County Ag Day. We will get back started with part two here shortly, in 4 minutes, in fact. So, thank you guys again for tuning in to YLE or YourLiveEvent.com or Your Live Event YouTube page and joining us for the 45th Annual Norman County Ag Day. Again, thank you all for joining us for the 45th Annual Norman County Ag Day. We will begin shortly here with part two. Thank you again for tuning in and watching with us on YourLiveEvent.com or Your Live Event YouTube channel. We will begin shortly here at 10:15. 10:15. We're going to get started here momentarily. Again, thank you for joining us on YourLiveEvent.com, Your Live Event YouTube channel for the 45th Annual Norman County Ag Day. Like I said before, we are going to get started here momentarily.
Given the timer? It is 10:18, so we want to stay on schedule today. However, I do want to point out I have some up at the front in the between the two extension banners. I have some youth tractor and farm safety training cards. It's information if you're hiring your farm labor if they're under the age of 16. We provide a youth tractor safety training for them. Now, the U.S. Department of Labor gives us a certificate to give them once they go through the training. I don't care if you put them on your payroll or how you hire your youth farm workers. What I'm concerned about is that those youth have the right training and they're operating your equipment and your PTOs safely. So if you have any interest of hiring youth that are under age 16, please go ahead and pick up a card up at the front here. Right behind Allison, there's a table up there. It talks about how to, what you need to do to get them signed up for this training. And we try to offer it. There's an online portion of training that the youth have to go through and take a classroom portion online. And then we have them come into a field day in-person operation where they get to practice driving that tractor and attaching and unattaching that PTO safely. They drive through a course and go through a test. So it's kind of like a mini driver safety, but we also provide a lot of farm safety education during those 2 days in person as well. So there's a website out there on this card to go ahead and look for more information on that and watch our extension website for the dates that we'll be having that event. So getting back to our program, I am going to introduce our next speaker, Allison Thompson. She is the market analyst with the Money Farm. She's going to look at our Rocky markets, take a look at the factors that have added uncertainty to our operations, and then give us an outlook. So please welcome Allison.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Again, my name is Allison Thompson. I live here in Ada. My family farms around Mahnomen, and I've been working at the Money Farm since 2017. And actually, moving forward, I am working on purchasing the business. So I'm hopefully going to be the new owner here shortly, which is pretty exciting. I'm really looking forward to taking on the legacy that Mike Kruger started almost 30 years ago with the Money Farm. So very exciting to be a part of it, and I'm excited to bring it back here to Ada in the community. But looking at the Money Farm, like she said, what I'm going to talk about here for markets. Uh-oh. Not working. No. It changes on the screen, but not this screen. No, that's all right. Nope. I don't know what the deal is. On the plus side, markets are kind of quiet today. Usually I hit the road and the little things will go down, and then it's really fun to talk markets on the road. So, but yeah, tomorrow obviously is USDA day, so you got me on the eve of USDA reports, even better, right? So that'll be some market movers ahead, but actually to see markets be kind of quiet beforehand is kind of deceiving. So they're not expecting any real big changes tomorrow, but we'll see what happens. So obviously markets are going to the moon, right? That's why I'm here to tell you, and that's why you won't throw anything at me and everything like that. We'll get through a presentation just fine. And we've had really good markets. To be honest with you, we had a really good run up at harvest. We sold some really good crops then. And actually during the holidays, even on low volume, we had some really strong prices, and we've been maintaining them, especially on the soybean side. So I'm going to go through a little bit of what's been going on. Obviously, some of the stuff affecting our markets is carrying over from 2022. So I'm going to go through some of those big topics and a little bit of the outlook going forward. And of course, with USDA tomorrow, I'm going to look at some of the numbers, not only for the US, but also some world numbers as well of what we're looking at there, and also some 23 drivers, some things that I think are worth watching here as we move into 2023 that are going to be moving our markets as well. And then, of course, while I'm here, I'm going to give you some analysis and some recommendations for moving some more grain for both old crop and new crop. So what happened in 2022? Obviously, we had quite a year. A lot happened. We had plenty happen. I'm going to start with the economy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that because it is another factor that's really influenced our grain prices, and it's been moving around, and it's obviously affecting our commodity demand. So the first one's obviously inflation. Everybody is kind of on the same page that we maybe have peaked in June when we hit 9.1%. November came out at 7.1. Sounds really good. We came down, but the Feds want to get it down to 2%. So we got a ways to go there, and they're continuing to hopefully they're saying, or they want to control inflation by increasing interest rates. And so they've been doing that pretty aggressively since March. They've done it about 7 times. And it looks like we're maybe in store for some more higher inflation rates down the road. So we'll get some more new information here shortly. Inflation, we'll get the new inflation numbers tomorrow for the month of December. And as far as interest rates go, the Feds are meeting the beginning of February. After that meeting, they'll probably have an announcement on what they're going to do with interest rates. I have a feeling that they're going to increase rates probably 2 more times at least. I know there's a lot of talk about how much they're going to do. I think they're going to maybe come back a little bit on their aggressiveness, maybe 25 basis points versus the full half. So still not that great, but I do think they may step back a little bit on that end. But yeah, I have a feeling that we're going to be dealing with this for some time. I don't think inflation is going to be going away even when they start reducing interest rates again, if they reduce interest rates again. I have a feeling this is going to be a long-term deal that's going to be working in our markets here for at least another year, if not into 2024. So with that, with the talk of inflation, obviously it's not just here in the U.S., but we've seen this global concern as well, and also recession fears. And that's caused the U.S. dollar to spike. We had the dollar actually make some record highs back in September, and we're seeing that because it is a safe haven demand. When the economy is in trouble, the U.S. dollar is seen as a safe place to store your money, so we've had it actually go up. But of course, the bad part about that is it hurts our commodity demand, right? Because we're sold in U.S. dollars, it just makes it higher on the global market. So watching that going forward will be key. But when you're looking at, okay. This isn't my updated presentation.
It was the one that was given to us.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay. I'll keep going. That's all right. Okay, so also looking at energy markets here too, they're another factor that's going to be affecting our commodity prices, and of course it's a big input on our farms. But crude's currently trading about $70 to $80 a barrel since it's peaked again last March with the Russia-Ukraine issues going on. But inflation fears are obviously turning us back into a little bit of a downturn. If inflation goes up, they're thinking demand will go down. So we've seen crude come back a little nicely. We have still relatively high though, and I had a chart in here that showed crude compared to last year, and it's still pretty high compared to then. But we are recommending guys to maybe load up on some fuel if you do have fuel needs, if you can get it under $3. Probably wouldn't be a bad place to start if you do. But of course, with crude and energies and oil markets, they obviously have a lot of politics involved, and I'm sure you've all heard about the politics involved in crude oil. So I'll cut it short on that end, but OPEC is going to be another one worth watching, especially if they start making production cuts. There's a lot of talk in the marketplace on whether they're actually moving those production cuts because of fundamentals, really dealing with supply and demand, or are they really controlling the price of oil? Remains to be seen. We can debate that back and forth. But OPEC's going to be one that's going to affect our prices here going forward too. And of course, we have Russia and Ukraine's deal as well. Obviously, that spiked our markets in March. Since then, we've come down a little bit, but we do have some fresh news on that front. In the beginning of December, Russia, we did have the G7, the group of seven, the EU and Australia actually put a price cap on oil. So they put it at $60. And this doesn't mean that they can't still buy Russian oil. They can still buy it even at any price, but they're really putting restrictions on shipping and insurance companies going forward. So if they're moving oil that is at a higher price, they're not allowed to do so. So Russia came back, and actually right in between the holidays, they came back and said, well, we're going to put a ban on all of our Russian oil to anybody who did the ban at $60 plus. So they're not going to be getting any Russian oil going forward. The interesting part of this is that actually Russian oil has been under $60. So it's actually come down since they put this all on. So China's been buying actually a lot of Russian oil. So I think that'll be an interesting factor to watch here going forward, especially with that. And, you know, we thought that we'd actually see another bump in oil here going into this winter, just because with heating, and we thought with the EU, with the bans of oil, that we'd probably see another jump in prices, but they've actually had some warm weather. And we have here too in the US, which has helped our natural gas prices and everything like that. But it'll be another thing worth watching here going forward, especially if weather does shift a little bit as winter continues. No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm fine. Thank you. Okay, so another factor that's obviously going to be continuing into 23 is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We're almost a year into that. That started at the end of February, the 24th. And this obviously, we've seen a lot of effects on the wheat market, and that seems to get a lot of the talk. But it's also worth noting that Ukraine is actually the third or fourth world's largest exporter of corn. And that kind of goes back and forth with Argentina, depending on their production each year. So corn's also another big factor here. And a lot of their corn, majority of Ukraine's corn, does go to China, which is, of course, another big buyer from the U.S. So if there is a production shortfall and they can't get to China, it does definitely look better for us. But of course, we have South America. That's another factor. I'll get to that. But of course, obviously, wheat's getting a majority of it because it does produce 30% of world exports. And of course, oil seeds too, big sunflower producers, sunflower seed producers, which of course go into the oils, and has really supported soy oil as well. So we've seen soybeans get a good boost from Russia-Ukraine's deal as well, just because of the soy complex. So in reality, this conflict does affect more than just wheat. We're seeing it affect all three major grains going forward. So we don't have a whole lot of fresh news on that end. We do know that Russia-Ukraine did come back with an export deal, which has been renewed. So we might see that hopefully continue up and through March. But there too, we're still seeing attacks continue. Their energy grid was kind of under attack too. All things that could affect their ports and shipments going out. So any fresh news with that, any headlines seem to definitely move our markets around. So it'll be worth watching, especially as we get closer to that 1 year mark, to see what's going forward. But it doesn't show signs of really slowing down at this point. I have a feeling it's going to be one of those other topics that may be continuing quite a bit into 2023. The other part that we're seeing affect our corn and soybean markets a lot here is we're kind of entering the South American weather market, mainly due to La Nina starting again for a third year, kind of unheard of. We haven't seen a third year La Nina since the 1950s, so it's kind of unheard of and really hard to predict from an ag standpoint of what that's actually going to do to crops. And obviously, with crops, they've increased their production substantially in South America since then. So it's created a lot more questions than answers as far as their trend lines are going to go. As far as yields, last year we had lower production there too because they were dry. Their crops started out in a lot worse condition last year than what we've seen so far this year. They've gotten some timely rains early on when they were planting. Now it's turning a little bit drier. So now as crop go into development, it might be a little bit more of a concern. But when we started looking at South America's production this year, we were looking at record production for both Argentina and Brazil. Argentina is obviously the biggest concern right now. They're the drier of the two. So they've actually pulled back a lot of their expectations, but Brazil is still capable of producing a record crop as we sit right now. They've started to harvest their crop, and it's kind of interesting. They start in the north and work their way south for harvest. It's the opposite of us in the southern hemisphere. So they're starting up there where they're seeing a lot better yield. So it'll be interesting to see as harvest progresses south where it does start to turn and be a little less productive. So right now there's a lot of talk about Brazil offsetting a lot of the losses in Argentina. So we'll see how that all equals out. And of course, this affects the soybean market. Any Argentina forecast, they update at least twice a day. So sometimes we'll see markets turn mid-session or something just on these weather forecasts that come out. And it's obviously a big deal for soybeans, not only just for soybeans, but the entire complex. Argentina is the top world exporter for soy oil and soy meal as well. So when you're looking at that, we're going to be turning elsewhere. And especially for soybeans too, Brazil's, again, going into harvest of their crop here, they're running low on supplies as well. So U.S. has supplies. We still have a decent amount of crop to export. So if something were to happen and they slow that pace down, we could definitely see some export business pick up. So I did put in a precipitation map. You can check that out in your booklet if you want to, but they are talking about El Nino starting to come back in, seeing some better weather conditions. And the last time we really had this type of pattern where it's been this dry in Argentina was back in 2008. We didn't see El Nino come back in until late 2009. So if that's the case, if we see that happen again, that weather didn't start really affecting things and getting better until August. So there is a good chance that we could see this affect second crop corn as well. So South America's production, these are our trade estimates that we're looking at for tomorrow's USDA report. Again, USDA has been really slow at making any bullish adjustments. I think we're all well aware of that. They're always a little slow on that end. But we've looked at private estimates from Brazil, and they're cutting these numbers substantially from where they are right now. So we could see some adjustments later. I just have a feeling they're going to wait until we get more into the heart of their harvest and production areas to really make some of those adjustments. On the U.S. side, again, we had an interesting year for crop production up here. Everything got put in a little late and, of course, affected what we were looking at for production and yields. Luckily, around here, I think everyone was pleasantly surprised with the yields that we received for both corn and soybeans and even wheat. But you go further south, and there was definitely some lag. We have a branch office in northwest Iowa, and it's hard to feel bad or sorry for guys who have 200 bushel corn yields, but they did have a yield drag this year from APHs about 20 bushels an acre. So while they were still probably pulling 200 bushels, it does definitely affect things on a production scale. So we started out in August with USDA expecting a 175 bushel per acre yield, soybeans around 52, and then ProFarmer came out and lowered those yields substantially. So that kind of gave the market a good boost, and we saw USDA go with it and lower those yields as we went through the fall. So that was really good, definitely helped our prices, gave us some good prices at harvest while those yield results were coming in. Looking at tomorrow's going to give us these final yield numbers and production numbers for 22. And you can tell by looking at the graph, or if you've looked at any of the estimates, they're not expecting any big moves. So this, while great, it looks like it'd probably be priced in, this does leave the element of surprise. So they could definitely make some adjustments here, and anything really skewed from these numbers could definitely create some market movement tomorrow. As personally, from our standpoint, I wouldn't be surprised to see soybeans move up a little bit and even corn move another maybe bushel per acre up a little bit in tomorrow's report. But again, it's not going to affect our production substantially. I think tomorrow they're going to be looking at some other numbers that are going to move our stock numbers a bit more. So looking at outlook, here's kind of what they're looking at for U.S. production, talking about our USDA reports again. But compared to last year, our stocks are obviously a lot tighter. And actually, if the numbers, even for estimates tomorrow, are true, My other slide had those on. But anyway, they're still looking for 9-year low U.S. stocks for corn, 2-year low stocks for soybeans, and 15-year low stocks for wheat. So obviously some bullish numbers there. But again, the numbers that they're really expecting are a little bit bearish on the corn side. So again, leaves an element for surprise going into tomorrow's report, especially if they start looking at some of those other trends, not just this year, but when you're looking at how it compares to other years, it's definitely still going to be tight. So looking at corn going forward on these USDA reports, obviously supply is going to be the main market mover here moving forward. Obviously there's supply issues everywhere. Ukraine obviously got cut off. South America's production is up in the air. US ending stocks, we were looking at declining numbers this fall with production going down. But now going forward, I think we're going to be looking at what they're going to do with exports. Our exports have been lagging in all 3 crops. So it really wouldn't be surprising to see the USDA cut those numbers in tomorrow's report. But given a lot of the sell-off that we saw last week when we came back from holidays, and then of today kind of seeing some quiet trade, I have a feeling some of those numbers are likely priced in, especially for corn and wheat. Okay, and then of course we know China needs corn, so we haven't seen a whole lot of purchases for the U.S. from China yet. But looking at world stocks with China, we're looking at 298 near 300 million bushels of corn. If we take China out of that, it does cut that number substantially. And I think we need to start looking at those numbers without China going forward, because once that corn is in China, it isn't going anywhere. They don't export corn, they only take in. So I think we need to start looking at some of those numbers a little bit more closely. And when you do, it definitely gets a lot tighter. Same thing for soybeans. Obviously, the only thing that's going to be different here is we're looking at demand. Where is demand going to shift from? We know that China obviously is a big buyer, but they've had some economic impacts here lately. They're still dealing with COVID over there. They are opening up their economy, but their COVID cases are continuing to rise, and that's kind of made some havoc with our outside markets as well. But we're seeing it also impact soybeans. So it's definitely going to be worth watching on how China comes out of that and if their economy rebounds. If it does, we could definitely see them want more supplies of soybeans, corn, wheat. The number goes on. But we're also seeing good oilseed demand, like I said earlier. Soy oil, soy meal, those complexes are remaining high. Soy meal has record long fund movement right now, and they're also maintaining near record high prices. So some of these other things are definitely going to be supporting soybeans going forward as well, specifically that byproduct demand. Otherwise, looking at it going forward, ending stocks for world numbers are really going to be looking for ideal production. We're going to need numbers from both the U.S. this coming year and Brazil to really keep this trend going. Looking at wheat there too, obviously going to be a little bit more supply driven. We know we have good quality wheat here in the U.S., but unfortunately the world's looking for cheap wheat. And right now we're just priced out of the world market. So our wheat exports have been lagging a bit, and they've actually been purchasing a lot from Russia. Russia's the cheapest on the board, and so is Ukraine. So they've actually gotten quite a bit of business, and from large buyers. Egypt, Asian countries have been buying a lot of wheat. But when the times do come and maybe economy starts turning around a little bit more, we'll see them look for that high quality wheat again, and we have it. They don't. So be interesting to watch there too. But again, like I said, with ending stocks, they are substantially low, 15-year lows for both the U.S. and the world. So we're going to need some rebounding crops here going forward. Tomorrow we will get seeding reports for winter wheat, and they are looking at like 7-year highs for winter wheat acres going in. But true, it probably did get planted, but we also know a good majority or a good portion of that did not come up. And what did come up is in poor condition right now. But on the other hand, we know that winter wheat has about 9 lives and still comes back in the spring, and it seems to be just fine. So it'll be interesting to see. Unfortunately, we're just going to be in a weather market for winter wheat till March. And it comes out of dormancy, then we'll start seeing that those real numbers. But until then, they'll talk that it's going to be dead and still come back. But we do have clients down there in winter wheat country, and there are some areas that are looking at tilling up some winter wheat acres down there and planting another cash crop this year. So that will affect things as well. So we'll see what spring does when it comes to it. But I did put up this production and usage chart here too. We're looking at global usage still remaining above production here, and it's been that way for 3 years. And I have a feeling it's going to continue in that same type of pattern, which just makes wheat tight when it all comes down to it. The other thing I want to point out too is that, there's a lot of talk that, high prices cure high prices. I believe that to an extent. But when it comes to demand, we've never seen demand go down really for any crop. It still grows and it still maintains. The population's still growing. A lot of countries need to eat. So I don't think demand is going to be affected as much as people think, even with high prices. A lot of these poor countries that are seeking cheap wheat do know that it's important to keep their people happy and not cause any unrest. So China is a good example of that too. They obviously have stocks to show for it just to keep people happy. Wheat outlook too, though, like I was saying with China, they do hold a lot of the wheat stocks in the world as well. If we start cutting that out, it definitely looks like a different picture. So some 23 drivers going forward. I do have a list in my presentation slides. You can kind of go through them, but obviously outside markets, weather, demand, any geopolitical headlines are going to cause a ruckus in our markets. And we just don't know when they're going to happen or when they're going to land, and subject to move on the daily. But one thing I do want to touch on is this La Nina. There is a lot of talk that this will start easing here into March and we might have a better spring this year. But looking at further out forecasts, we're still looking at above normal temperatures going into spring. So there is a good chance that some of these La Nina effects could come into play again during our growing season. And if that's the case, we could see a lot of the Corn Belt remain dry again. They could have maybe they'll be wet during planting like we were, but they might have a drier growing season. So not just here in the US, but again, that could affect parts of the EU that were struggling this last year, parts of Asian countries, South America. We could see a bit of a difference there. In Australia, they've been wet. They've had quality issues on their wheat. So we could see it affect globally quite a few different places that we rely heavily on for production. Also, this time of year, I start looking at corn and soybean ratios for crops to give us an idea of what planting might be a little bit beneficial and what the market's telling us. So these are based on Monday's closing prices, and to be honest with you, we haven't moved a whole lot since then. So I'm comparing new crop prices and getting a ratio on what the market's currently favoring going forward. Currently favoring corn to beans, favoring corn to wheat, and favoring wheat to beans. So this tells me that soybeans and wheat need to do some buying of acres. So looking, I'm going to get into my technical stuff here shortly, and it does look like both could be turning here shortly. But I also want to just point out, devil's advocate here, that these ratios can correct by prices moving lower as well. Right? If soybeans all of a sudden tank, it definitely helps that ratio out too. So it's not always bullish that I'm necessarily bullish corn or wheat and soybeans. It can definitely turn on another angle as well. But obviously going to keep our volatility alive. So when we're looking at March corn here, we did test some pretty good support. We're getting down to the lower end of our ranges here. On the March corn, we actually, the charts actually look a little bit different. I'm actually getting close to a buy signal on corn. So we're holding off on doing any more sales here. I wouldn't get too antsy on where we're trading today. We did have a pretty decent sell-off over the holidays on corn. So we do have orders in. If you wanted to start purchasing some more or selling some more, I would do so right around that $7 level is what we would do. Looking at new crop, we've had really decent support for the most part around $5.90. I wouldn't get too excited to do any more. If you have some on, I'd be fine waiting till we get back up to $6.10 to $6.20. Otherwise, if you don't have anything sold for 23, I'd probably start around $6. Looking at soybeans, there too, we've had some really good bounce here over the holidays, but we've kind of settled back. We've had some good support around $14.80, which is good. But again, kind of still stuck in a good solid uptrend here. And actually, since December, we have rallied over $1 in soybeans. And since harvest, it's actually been close to $2 that we've rallied. So pretty surprising. And we're actually seeing decent basis levels too hang around. So equaling out to some pretty good cash prices. Looking at November beans, they're too pretty decent area, around $14 if you haven't put anything on the books yet for 23 beans. Otherwise, they're too pretty solid uptrend, but again, we're kind of flirting with that 1380 mark, or we had been. Breaking that, we could see a retest down to 1350 pretty quick. So if you don't have anything on, I'd recommend putting some orders in right around 14. Looking at spring wheat, that doesn't look as pretty. Yesterday, we actually tested some lows. We had quite a session yesterday. Dang, pretty good range of trading. But we did test some lows there from back in December near 890. That was good. If we were to break that level, I'd be a lot worried about 850 coming. So since we've held it, my charts obviously look a little bit different now since Monday's trading, but I am getting close to getting a buy signal on beans. So honestly, of the three crops, I'm probably the most bullish wheat going forward. Stocks are still tight, numbers are still tight. I do look for wheat to turn around here. I don't think hopefully we're not going to be making new lows anytime soon. And again, tomorrow's report should be supportive, but if, again, who knows, USD is always good for a few surprises. I would be watching that 890 level for breaking support if we get down there. Same with spring, next year's crop too. I'd probably wait until we get closer to $9 to add any sales there if you haven't done any. Otherwise, yeah, we've been testing and making some new lows on the new crop. I do have our recommendations in up here. Feel free to give me a call or questions. We do put out standard recommendations. These are those, but we also work on some private marketing plans as well that work on a one-on-one basis. But currently, we're pretty well sold, over 50%, close to 50% sold on all crops for 22, and we've recently added some sales for 2023, taking us to 10 to 20%. So not a bad time to start thinking of next year's cropping prices. So with that, I kind of covered a wide range of markets. Any questions, concerns, opinions?
One right here.
Yes?
When you were looking at those ratios there for the wheat ratios, was that a spring wheat ratio?
I'm using spring wheat.
It's always spring wheat?
I'm using spring wheat, yep, and I'm using September for new crop. Yep. Any other questions? My husband's here and he isn't asking anything. He knows it all. Good deal. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. So, can you have my updated presentation?
Check with Missy.
All right, thank you, Allison. Our next speaker is Jim Anderson. Jim is a longtime spring wheat breeder with the University of Minnesota. He's going to talk to us about performance data and summarize some of those recent wheat varieties. So please welcome Jim.
Just hold it like that. However's comfortable.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to give my usual talk about spring wheat varieties, talk a lot about the new varieties and how they're performing, and at the end a little bit about our breeding program and kind of what our latest releases and how they're performing. There's a security alert on this. So.
Technical difficulties. Sorry about that.
There we go.
Should be good now.
All right, thanks. All right, so this is a presentation prepared by myself and Joachim Wiersma up in Crookston. So if you were at Prairie Grains in Grand Forks, it's a similar type of presentation and data that we have. So this is our new baby on the St. Paul campus. The Ag Experiment Station bought us a combine. So we pay kind of a a fee to use it on an hourly basis, so it costs us about $8,000 to take care of all of our plots on the St. Paul campus. I don't think I can give you guys sticker shock, but for other people that don't know how much this equipment costs, this is a little over $300,000 for a plot combine. The great thing about this is it has an onboard weighing system, so we get the yields off of our 8-foot long plots, immediately. So like next day, I can have those yields rather than waiting months for students to clean them and weigh them and do all the processing on them. So it's going to really be a boon for us to get that data back a lot faster, and it's a lot cleaner grain also. So all the data that I'm going to present, you can find it at the Ag Experiment Station website here, or hit that QR code. And all the slides are in your book too, so if you can't see all the numbers on the slides, you can certainly follow along there. All right. Not advancing.
Technical difficulties
Yeah.
today.
I think it's just
Where are the-
extend the. Should be.
Oops. Okay, let me see, how did you get it back to the, sorry about this, guys.
I think we have to go here and go HDMI. Right? Was it HDMI 1 or 2? Okay.
There we go.
Now I went.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so here's our recent releases from our breeding program. Going back to 2013 with Linkert, newest ones are Torgy and Rothsay, and our next release isn't going to be till at least 2025, the way it's going right now. And I don't even know what numbered line that is. There's three or four candidates. Hopefully one of them will make it. But the years have been so wildly different that we're just not seeing the consistency there and the performance to beat Torgy or Rothsay in those experimentals right now. So we're moving on to the next ones. Every year, the Minnesota Association of Wheat Growers does a variety survey. This is the latest results from 2022 in green, and we can see how they did in 2021 as well. Torgy was number 1, followed by Westbred 9590, Valda 9479, sorry, and Murdoch. Linkert is definitely dropping off. Torgy took a big jump up, and I think Torgy had a pretty good year in 2022, so hopefully it'll stick around for a while as well. And as we go through the data slides, I'll try to point out where some of these more popular varieties are falling on those, so you can look at those in comparison with some of the newer varieties that are coming along as well. This is the list of newer varieties that we tested in the last year. There's always 7 or 8 new ones. So we solicit all the seed companies that have spring wheat genetics. They can enter in our trial for a $1,500 fee. University, South Dakota State, North Dakota State, we don't charge them. So they can enter materials as well. So we've got 1 from South Dakota, 1 from North Dakota, Meridian, 2 from Lima Grain, CAG, and 1 cropland variety. And Rothsay is the first time appearing in the trials, but we obviously have multi-year data because it comes from our program. For some of these, we have 2 years of data, but for most of them, it's just a single year of data, so we don't have full comparisons for like some of the disease traits. All right, the numbers are going to be way too small here for you to read, but key in on the colors. Green is good, red is bad. So that's the scale here. All of the newer varieties are in bold, so you can kind of key in on that also. We've got a lot of newer varieties among the higher yield group. Rothsay actually had a very good year. Rothsay, I think, is more oriented, more adapted to the northern part of the state. So think north of I-94. So all of you guys would be in that area. In the past, we've had other varieties that are kind of equally good, north or south. Lang MN was better in the south, and that's why it didn't really catch on up in this area. So this is all sorted based on 2022 yields. Usually I would sort something like this on the 3-year yields, but 2021 was such a different type of year. It was almost it's almost as if 2021 didn't exist as far as data, because we had heat, we had drought, yields were low, we didn't have any lodging, didn't have any disease. For a breeder, we just couldn't get separation and really, tell the good ones from the bad ones. 2022, on the other hand, was almost a perfect year. It was almost too good. I was spending too much time in the fields, driving around all the locations. There was just so much data to collect. The yield data was surprisingly good given how late we planted, so we could really differentiate things well. So I think 2022 hopefully is a very, very predictive data set of how these varieties will perform in the future. So that's yield. Protein, obviously we always have a pretty good range. We're still testing bowls. Bowls is usually almost always over 16% protein in our trials. The low end in our trials is usually somewhere in the 12s. On your farm, these lower ones, you'd maybe struggle to get a 12% protein just because of field variability, maybe a little lower nitrogen levels than we have in our plot trials. So a pretty good range here. Rothsay, our new one, is kind of middle of the pack. You should be able to get a 14% protein on it in most years. Here's Torgy, a little bit higher at 15.1, so pretty good range there. And the protein also correlates with baking quality. So baking quality, think low volume, how much water does the flour absorb, gluten strength. Those are kind of the three main characteristics. So a 1 is best, 9 is worst. We're doing still fairly well in terms of the varieties that we're growing and their quality, and we have to keep that in mind because half our wheat does get exported. It's kind of the highest priced wheat on the world market, so we want to keep that reputation intact. So Linkert, which we had grown a lot of over the years, is a 1 on this scale. It's great quality. Everybody that likes Linkert should be happy with its performance in the bakery. Some of the more popular varieties right now, WB 9590, pretty good protein. It's okay quality, not quite as good as Linkert, but not too bad. WB 9479 is on here. That one, very good protein, very good quality as well. So as long as we keep growing those, I think our importers will be happy with the quality of our wheats. Yield versus protein. This is only 3 locations from 2022. Just to reinforce, we always see this trend. The higher yielding varieties are always going to be lower protein, or that's usually the case. But there are some that are kind of getting into this upper right-hand quadrant. W9590 is really, I think, a very strong performer, pretty good yield and protein. AP Smith is in there, Driver. Rothsay is kind of pushing in there. So take a look at those varieties in particular. That's kind of the holy grail for wheat breeders, is trying to find both yield and protein in the same variety. Physiologically, it's just a difficult thing to achieve. Straw strength has been a major emphasis of our program for more than 10 years now, since we expanded the breeding program, going to more locations. The best ones are AP Smith and Linkert, and this is definitely the reason that Linkert was so popular. It had the protein, it had the straw strength, ease of harvest. Rothsay, our newest one, I was right on the fence of being a 2 or a 3. The 2022 data pushed it a little bit more towards a 3. But I would warn you that there's even though this is a 1 to 9 scale, it seems like it's pretty exaggerated. There's pretty big differences just if you go 1 point. So compare a Rothsay, which is a 3, to MN Torgy, which is a 4. Rothsay, think of Rothsay as being like a 2.6, and Torgy is more like a 4.4. So there's almost a 2-point difference, but with rounding, it turns out to be a 1-point difference on this scale. So maybe that's something I'll start putting decimal places to accentuate those differences a little bit more. But in most years, you won't see a difference. 2022, I think Rothsay definitely stood better than Torgey, at least in our trials. Torgey, in some locations, we saw some lodging. Fives, you would probably see some lodging in a 2022 type year. They're going to get tall enough, and if the temperatures stay cool, it's a good yielding year, you're going to see some lodging. Scab, still our biggest threat as far as a disease. Maybe not the most prevalent. Maybe BLS is more prevalent at this point. We do have fungicides. There's, a new fungicide coming on the market every couple of years. Miravis Ace is the latest one. It allows you to open up that application window a little bit more, and the more data that we have now suggests that you can, try to target kind of mid anthesis or even late anthesis. So those earlier heads are maybe five days out, and you can still get good protection on them. So you don't have to be quite as precise on that application timing, so that'll help. Still doesn't give complete control though, so the genetics definitely helps. I still recommend, looking at these 3s and 4 varieties. Those are the ones that we would call moderately resistant. There's still no 1s or 2s on here. We have not found anything that's that good. There's been a few experimentals that I would say are a 2, but they have other problems. They're too tall, or they just don't yield well enough. So that's still the best we have, and for the foreseeable future, it's going to be 3s and 4s for scab. But these are much better than the 6s or 7s. I always have to caution about these West-bred varieties. This is the number one negative on the West-bred varieties is their diseases. They're susceptible to scab. They're susceptible to bacteria leaf streak, other fungal leaf diseases as well. So you're going to have to probably 2 passes of fungicide, 1 to protect early in the season for tan spot septoria, and almost certainly to protect against scab at anthesis time. So I really caution against these 7s. We haven't had a lot of scab the last few years, none in 2021. Didn't hear about too much last year. I thought it was setting up to be a pretty good year for this disease, but it just didn't materialize. But we still can have epidemics of scab if we get the right weather conditions at or just before anthesis. Here's the other disease we put a lot of emphasis on, mostly because there's no other control options. It's just genetics. There's nothing that we know of you can do for crop rotation, no chemicals. Basically, you're at the mercy of Mother Nature and what variety you planted and the timing of different weather events. Pretty big differences here. Just from selecting for what we see in our trials, and other breeders have done this too, we've identified some pretty good genetics. There's some good ones to choose from. The ones that are rated as a 2 or a 3, you would probably not, you should never see a significant yield hit on them. The 4s and 5s are going to be a little bit more erratic. Some locations maybe you'll see some damage, other locations you won't. The 6s and 7s, these are the ones where in our trials, if any variety has it, it's probably going to be those, and some of them can get pretty severe. Gunsmoke is the first variety I think we've ever rated as an 8. So it really fires up when this disease comes along. This is the first time in many years that I've presented data on tan spot septoria. So these are both fungal pathogens. It's here, I've got photos here, but it's very difficult in the field to distinguish between the two. In fact, some experts at NDSU, they work on these 2 diseases for a living. Sat in my office a couple years ago, and I said, how do you tell the difference? And they said they don't try to tell the difference. They just lump them together. The treatment is basically the same. Fungicides at the 3 to 5 leaf stage, if you're seeing some disease starting there. You can come back with the flag leaf application if you want, or you can wait a week or 2, hit it at anthesis with your scab fungicides, and that'll keep these pathogens at bay also. This last year, we saw quite a bit of tan spot or septoria, not sure which, in our plots. So we got really good ratings on it. Sometimes it's not always easy to tell the difference between this and bacteria leaf streak, so that becomes a challenge. But in the cases where I could differentiate it, we were seeing some good differences there. Again, the 3s and the 4s we would consider moderately resistant. Rothsay was among those better ones. Here's the Westbreds at a 6, and then we got some very susceptible ones here at a 7, where it may even pay to do a 3 fungicide application. So flagleaf, anthesis, and the early season on those really susceptible ones. So we're seeing some pretty big differences there. Pre-harvest sprouting, I don't think anybody had issues with that this last year. Nobody should have had issues in 2021 because it was so dry. 2019, though, is where we had some pre-harvest sprouting and low falling numbers. So sorry to bring back bad memories of low falling numbers, but the two are related. So if you have sprouted wheat, it will give you a low falling number. But the vice versa is not always true. So you can have low falling numbers in the absence of visible sprouting. The reason for that is a low temperature shock. So think down into if you get down into the 40s at night, early, mid-August, a few weeks before harvest, that can cause late maturity alpha amylase to kick in. And that, because those enzymes get activated, that gives you the low falling number. Some varieties are kind of predisposed to that genetically. There's really nothing you can do about it from a harvest timing standpoint or any cultural sort of thing. You just have to kind of live with it. The good thing is that these varieties that have good pre-harvest sprouting resistance are pretty resistant to that late maturity alpha amylase as well. The two are somewhat correlated. So if you don't want to have problems with low falling number, stick to the varieties that are 1s and 2s on here, and you should have less risk. The ones that are 3s and 4s kind of do give me pause. It's not the numbering scale maybe isn't exaggerated enough here. We only go up to 4s on our hard red spring wheats. We're saving the 5s and higher for white wheats. We've tested white wheats once in a while. They're all like 6s, 7s. They sprout. That's why we don't grow any white wheats here. White wheats are in drier areas. Think western North Dakota, Kansas, because they're too susceptible to sprouting. So overall, our germplasm is fairly resistant, but be on the watch out for these 4s. If you're growing those varieties, you can see there, the forecast has rain in it or fog, mist in the morning for, a couple day period. I would try to get those off the field as fast as possible. Even take them a little wetter, higher moisture, even if you have to dry them a little bit, just to get them off the field. Reduce your risk of having sprouting issues with those varieties. The 1s and the 2s, they can probably hang out there a little bit longer and tolerate those wet conditions at harvest time. So that was the last data slide. I always like to put together a list of a few picks, so a few varieties you can focus on. Maybe you're already growing these, maybe you haven't considered growing them. Our criteria this year were things that we've been tested at least 3 years, so we know them fairly well. They're at a 5 or less for both FHB and BLS, a 3 or less for pre-harvest sprouting, a 6 or less, or better, I should say, for quality. So that leaves this list. So it trimmed it down pretty good from 40-some varieties down to 7. All of these that are on the list happen to be a 3 or a 4 for both bacterial leaf streak and Fusarium head blight scab. So pretty good disease package, or at least to those two diseases for this group. So the first one here, CP3530, that's made this list for several years. It's a little bit taller variety. So if you need or have a market for straw, it's maybe one to consider. It is a little bit more susceptible to lodging. So in a year like 2022, probably would have had some lodging issues with it. Drivers from South Dakota, kind of a nice combination of protein and yield. A few negatives there. Dynagrow has one called Ambush that's been kind of in that top pack for yield. Again, a little weaker straw. Rothsay has yielded well in the north, really good straw strength. The only real negative I could pick on would be that quality. It's a 5, so for us, it's kind of borderline. We wouldn't want to release anything that's worse than that. We want to maintain those markets, especially in a variety that we think could be fairly popular. And I think Rothsay is a variety that within a couple years, it's going to be 20% of our acres. Now, I've made those predictions before. I've been wrong. I didn't predict the success of Linkert. I thought Lang was going to be better. So who knows? Flip a coin whether it's going to be successful or not. But Rothsay, I think, is going to be a good one. Torgy has already kind of proven itself as a fairly popular variety with not a lot of downside. SY611 CL2, that's a Syngenta variety that has resistance to the Clearfield herbicide. That's an IMI herbicide. I don't think there's a lot of that variety growing around here, but if it fits your crop rotation and your herbicide rotation and whatever resistant weeds you may have, it's maybe one to consider. Overall, pretty strong. Valda's been on this list basically since it was released. It's always in that top yield group. All right, and the last slide I'm going to show is comparing Rothsay to the more popular varieties in the state. So how does it compare to the most popular varieties? I've got it sorted based on 3-year yield northern locations. So among all of the top 6 or 7 for acres grown in the state, Rothsay is on top. And with that, you get kind of middle of the pack protein, so kind of a decent combination between yield and protein. It is the latest variety on here. If I could change one thing about Rothsay, if I could make it 2 or 3 days earlier, that would be a great thing. But I can't do that. It is what it is. I would try to get that planted as your first variety, maybe, if you want to try to get it off the field as fast as possible. So that would be one way to kind of help out there. There are other things that are later, and some of the genetics we're getting from other providers are several days later than this. I don't think our breeding program wants to go too much later than Rothsay. Shelley was already in the late side. Rothsay is about a half a day later. The big selling point for Rothsay is going to be this combination of yield and straw strength. So think almost Linkert type straw strength. Maybe 1 out of every 10 years you would see a difference between Linkert and Rothsay, with Linkert being slightly better. So Rothsay is very strong. Good disease package overall, bacteria leaf streak, FHB, kind of in those top groups. Not quite as good for pre-harvest sprouting, but we think it's good enough. So that's kind of where Rothsay sticks out. So Rothsay is in the second year of seed increase, so certified seed growers are getting it this year, and then certified seed should be widely available a year from now, is where Rothsay is at. So I'd like to acknowledge our breeding team. This is my group in St. Paul. Some of these folks work on other crops. About half of them work on wheat. I also oversee breeding programs on Kernza, Pennycress, and Camelina. So there's a few people that work on those crops. And then we have this whole network across the state and St. Paul-based folks that help do all this work. And also I'd like to acknowledge our funding. So the first one on here is your checkoff dollars through the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council. That's about 1/3 of our funding. We have a federal grant from U.S. Wheat Barley Scab Initiative. That's about 1/3 of our funding, and the other 1/3 is coming from the state or University of Minnesota sources. So I'll stop there. Thanks for your time. Pleasure to be here. Any questions?
Can you define north for Rothsay? Is Winoma, Norman County considered north?
Yes. Yeah, I would say anything north of 94. So we have testing site, half our testing sites are south of 94. So Fergus Falls, Lamberton, Waseca, St. Paul, Becker area.
Oh, with Torgny this year, we planted it late, and it seemed like the straw stayed green and the kernels were dry. They were drier, compared to the whole plant.
Yeah. So the comment was, Torgny was planted later, the straw stayed green, but the kernels were dry. Did you notice that with any other varieties?
Well, the Torgny was the last one we planted, so.
Okay.
I did, but
Okay. I think that maybe was a little bit of the case with other varieties as well.
because of the late planting.
Maybe. It was such a different year for me personally driving around the state. The southern locations looked like kind of normal height wheat. On the St. Paul campus, we were hot and dry, almost like 2021. The wheat was this tall. And then I go up to Crookston for a field day as my first trip up north. Torgny's this tall. And I can't believe how tall everything is. It's like I don't even recognize it as being Torgny. It looks so different. So I think we haven't tested the varieties planted that late under those conditions. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we maybe see something a little different in 22.
From a breeding standpoint, what's the driving factor behind the prevalence of this almost wheat that we're starting to see in more and more lineups?
Onless wheat. It's just the genetics. I don't think there's anything that's really beneficial about it or not. Historically, but back in the 1930s, even up to 1960s, Minnesota grew a lot of allness varieties. Thatcher was, very popular, 30s, 40s, 50s. Chris in the 1960s. Starting in about 1970s, we started breeding with awns on the wheat, and they've been the most prevalent since. The awns are green, so they do photosynthesize, and the thought is that they do contribute a little bit to the grain weight and the yield, so it's overall a good thing to have them. It's maybe a little bit of a negative if you do get a lot of moisture near harvest time, because the mist or rain could drip down those awns and keep the spikes a little bit wetter, and also it could cause more shattering. So if those awns start rattling around the seed, it could help the seed start falling out. I don't think those are real big issues. I think we're pretty strong in those traits. We don't see a lot of shattering. So I think the photosynthesis is probably the main reason that we have awns on our wheat. If you go into Canada, it's maybe half or more awnless. So I think some of those is Canadian genetics that are coming down here.
In the back.
In the,
Is there any correlation to a variety having a poor pre-harvest sprouting rating and its ability to germinate quickly in spring?
In spring wheat, I would say no. If it were a winter wheat, that's a definite possibility, because you could select for too much dormancy, and there's not enough time from when you harvest a winter wheat to planting, just a couple of months in some cases, that yes, you could have too much dormancy still there and issues. I'm not aware of that with spring wheat. You could do a germ test and see, but anything you're doing a germ test on, you should be upper 90%, like 97, 98, 99% before you put that seed in the ground. So that's something you could test for yourself, but I think we have so many months that dormancy has dissipated, and it should be fine.
Any other questions for Jim?
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. All right, thank you, Jim. Our next presentation is going to be an update from our Norman County Soil and Water Conservation Office. So I will hand the mics over to them, and they can, there's no slides for them, so they'll just give you an update on what's going on. So if you hold it together like that.
Hello, I'm Lori Thrunson. I'm the district manager at the Norman County SWCD. This is Emily Knudsen. She's the staff there. She is a technician and also the ag inspector for Norman County. And then we have Mark Christensen, who's sitting back there, and he's our technician. We also have Eric Rockstead in the room, and he is a supervisor on our board. We offer quite a few programs that we have. We do tree planting and matting services for anybody that's interested in farmstead shelter belts or windbreaks. We have a variety of programs that offer financial assistance if you're looking for you need some help with erosion or some structural projects. You can contact our office and see if we can help you out. We do piggyback with NRCS on a few programs also for financial and technical assistance. We have an Ag BMP program through the office that offers a 3% interest on conservation tillage on implements, or if you're looking to upgrade feedlots or anything, you can do a loan for 10 years, and that'll be at 3%, and that's through Minnesota Department of Ag. So if you're interested in anything like that, we have information on that. We also do well sealing, so if you have any abandoned wells that you would like sealed, we offer 50% cost share on that program. We also have we own about 70 acres of land north of Twin Valley, and we have 49 acres that's available for pasture for rent for this coming year for 2023. So if anybody's interested in putting in a bid for that, we have packets in the back room over there. You can pick one up, and it's all fenced and ready to go. It's got 5 different paddocks that we utilize for rotational grazing. So if anybody's interested in that, check back on our booth back there. And if you got any questions, stop in the office or give us a call and see if we can help you out with something.
Hi, as Lori said, my name is Emily Knudsen. I work out of the Soil and Water Office in Twin Valley. I recognize a few of you, so it's good to see some familiar faces. Sorry, technical difficulties already. I assist the MDA with seed and noxious weed regulation in Norman County. So this year, they did make some changes to the noxious weed list. There was some additions, not necessarily anything taken off the list, but there were some additions or changes as far as some moving more to the prohibited list. They do have it on the MDA website if anybody wants to look it up. I didn't print it off yet because they haven't come out with a pamphlet yet, and so I didn't create that. But it is available on the MDA website if anybody wants to look at it. I did have some inquiries about the noxious weed handbook from the MnDOT, or Minnesota Department of Transportation. I'm sure this looks familiar to some of you. I've had it out for a couple years. This is also available on the MDA website. If anybody wants to print it themselves, or if you are unable to do so, just let me know and I can print it for you and get it in a binder for you. It is helpful as far as like picture comparisons, either on-site visits or whatever. If you have a question regarding what something might be or a look-alike, it does have that available in this booklet. Also, it does have treatment considerations as far as timing throughout the year, what's appropriate when. Not everyone has a herbicide recommendation for it, but most of them I believe do. But it's all listed in here. Like I said, that's located on the MDA website. If you want to print it yourself, or if you would like me to, please let me know. I do have several pamphlets and brochures available at our booth around back. Some of the common weeds that we find around Norman County, I'm sure some of you have seen them, are leafy spurge, wild parsnip, the thistles, bull, plumas, Canada thistle, buckthorn, that's a common one. It seems like every grove of trees you look around probably has it in it. So please be on the lookout for that and take care of it if possible. Again, if you don't have the resource, if you don't take any of the pamphlets that I have out back, everything is available online. That's the joy of technology today. The MDA website, mda.state.mn.us. If you just go under noxious weeds, it lists it all. It also gives you pictures online, what to look for, what it looks like. And there's also other websites listed, like Minnesota Wildflowers, for example. If it doesn't have all the info that you're looking for, there's other various websites that you can look at for reference. If you do have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact me. I am available to come out and look on site at any of the issues. Whether you want to be present or not, it doesn't matter. Otherwise, you can contact your local weed inspector, somebody that's more local. You might even know them, either your city mayors or elected township supervisors. Those are your local weed inspectors. They do report back to me, if it needs to go beyond that. Our ultimate goal is voluntary compliance. If we would like you to take care of it yourself, we don't want to go through any further steps to enforce anything if we don't have to, but it can get to that point. So I please just ask for voluntary compliance, take care of your weeds, and we'll be all on the same page. As far as what works and what doesn't work, talk to your neighbors, talk to other farmers, because I'm sure somebody that you know has encountered an issue, or talk to somebody that's encountered an issue. Just communicate with each other. If you need additional resources, I'm always available, and if I don't know, I can reach out and find something or somebody that does. So, like I said, just talk to each other. That's your biggest source of information. Other than that, I think that's all I have. But yeah, so we have plenty of resources in the back. Otherwise, like I said, the MDA website's great as far as finding anything that you'd need. So,
Any questions for the Soil and Water Office?
thanks, Heather.
Thank you. All right. At this time, we're going to pause our live feed and we're going to go into our Norman County Corn and Soybean Growers Annual Meeting. So I think, Jack, you're paused. Okay.
Please make sure you're joining us for part 3 of the 45th Annual Norman County Ag Day.